Hello and welcome to this episode of the Shakespeare podcast, and we'll be looking at the characters in the play of Hamlet. It's obvious from the last two podcasts telling the story of Hamlet that this is a big play. It is in fact several stories all at the same time. There's the life and tragic death of Hamlet, Prince of Denmark, the doomed love affair of Hamlet and Ophelia, and the political intrigue surrounding Fortinbras and the Norwegian army. So, how do we get into the play? Well, there are several ways, from assessing Hamlet as a tragic hero, to a line-by-line analysis of some of the most iconic speeches and scenes of the play. In this podcast, I want to briefly discuss some of the characters of the play to show that each of the several characters in Hamlet have their own story and their own trajectory. The most obvious is perhaps Laertes, who is a mirror to Hamlet's situation. Like Hamlet, Laertes is a university student, and like Hamlet, he goes off to university only to discover that his father has been murdered. But Laertes' return to court is significantly different to Hamlet's. Laertes is not about to hang around discussing life and death issues like Hamlet. As Laertes says, "I'll not be juggled with." Ironically, of course, Laertes is manipulated by Claudius into killing Hamlet, and is therefore very much juggled with. You could argue that the structure of the play Hamlet begins to repeat itself after the killing of Polonius in Act 3, Scene 4. Even the ghost makes a surprise reappearance. The similarities between Hamlet and Laertes are not lost on Hamlet, who mentions it in Act 5, Scene 2. Quote, "For by the image of my cause I see the portraiture of his." But the similarities between Hamlet and Laertes only serve to highlight their differences. Laertes' all-action response to his situation throws Hamlet's inaction into further relief. Laertes also dies at the end of the play, poisoned by his own rapier. But the tragedy belongs to Hamlet, of course. It's Hamlet's story, after all. It's Hamlet's dad who was the king. In Hamlet's story, the throne of Denmark is at stake. Which brings us to Hamlet's Uncle Claudius. Uncle Claudius is the villain of the play. He's the guy who Hamlet must get his revenge on for murdering his father. But of course, Claudius has his own story. The story of a man who kills a king in order to take the throne for himself. A few years after Hamlet, Shakespeare will write a whole play on this subject called Macbeth. Claudius not only kills his brother, the king, but he marries his sister-in-law. Does he love Gertrude? In most productions, he tries to stop Gertrude from drinking from the poisoned cup at the end of the play. On the other hand, is marrying Gertrude just a way of making the throne more secure for himself? She's the queen, after all. Her husband should be the king, shouldn't he? After becoming king, Claudius has a diplomatic problem with the new Norwegian king Fortinbras, who's also a potential embarrassment, because Fortinbras inherited the throne after his father died, unlike Hamlet. And Claudius also has a family problem. It's his nephew who should have inherited the throne. He's acting very strangely. Claudius also has a guilty conscience about murdering his brother. He doesn't believe that Hamlet's madness has anything to do with his love for Ophelia at all. When Gertrude tells him that Hamlet has killed Polonius, Claudius immediately says that it could have been him. Claudius's guilt also manifests itself in his paranoia. He's constantly sending Polonius or Rosencrantz and Guildenstern off to spy on Hamlet. He reacts badly to the play within the play, The Mousetrap, about a guy who murders his own brother. And he tells us in Act 3, Scene 3, that he can't pray. And of course, he can't pray because he can't repent of his crime while still keeping the fruits of his crime, that is, the throne of Denmark. In the end, it all comes out very badly for Claudius. His plan to murder his brother and take over the throne goes disastrously wrong. He doesn't just end up dead. In effect, his crime wipes out an entire generation. So, on the one hand, we have Laertes and Claudius, both of whom behave badly and commit sins against our hero Hamlet. And there's also Gertrude, who's a more ambivalent character. There's a question to be asked. Does Gertrude switch sides halfway through the play? But there are also characters who do nothing wrong. Innocents who are swept up in an unfortunate tide of events over which they have little or no control. Let's take the case of sweet Ophelia. She's a young woman whose father is the equivalent of the Prime Minister of Denmark. She lives in the royal castle and has a very nice life. The gravedigger in Act 5, Scene 1 describes Ophelia as, quote, a gentlewoman. She's a lady. It appears that she's in a relationship with Hamlet, who is the Prince of Denmark and supposedly heir to the throne. Now, as boyfriends go, Hamlet's got potential. He's rich and famous. He's got his own castle. And your kids get to be royalty. On the other hand, he's not very nice to her, at least from what we see in the play. And Hamlet immediately breaks off his relationship with her once he's spoken to the ghost and knows that he's on a mission to get his revenge. Why does he do that? Why does Hamlet break up with Ophelia? Why doesn't he just take her into his confidence like he does Horatio? The only thing that Ophelia does, which Hamlet can take offence at, is what her father tells her to do. Gertrude tells us in Act 5, at Ophelia's funeral, that she had hoped that Hamlet was going to marry her, so the relationship that they have must have been very serious. Ophelia's world takes a turn for the worst when he breaks up with her and starts being nasty to her. But it gets infinitely worse when her ex-boyfriend murders her father. This causes Ophelia to go mad, which is one of the big themes of the play. And ultimately, it costs her her life. There's a number of references in the play as to whether Ophelia committed suicide or not. Gertrude's account of her death makes it sound like an accident, but the gravediggers doubt that it was, and Laertes has a discussion with the priest. In the play he's down as the doctor. His discussion with the priest suggests that there's some ambiguity over what actually happened. What's not in doubt is that Ophelia is innocent of just about everything except having a boyfriend who's a prince. It doesn't always turn out the way that it did for Kate Middleton or Cinderella. Sometimes being in love with a prince can have catastrophic results, like the original story of The Little Mermaid. Google it. Which brings us to another innocence, or in this case a pair of innocents, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are friends of Hamlet's from university. Good friends, if Rosencrantz is to be believed. They are called to the court to help out an old friend who's got a mental health issue. His dad's just died, his mum's remarried, and he's just lost a job that he thought he was certain to get. And two of his mates are then asked to help him out. Who wouldn't do that? That's basically all they're asked to do. They preach loyalty to the king, which would have been perfectly normal at the time, and they try and help their friend Hamlet. Well, that turns out to be a big mistake. In 1966, at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, a new play was premiered by a young playwright called Tom Stoppard. The play was called Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are Dead. It's a tragedy, it's a comedy, it's absurd, it's existential. It's based on the idea that we, as the audience, we know the story of Hamlet. So we know that Hamlet's ship was overrun by pirates. That's right, pirates. And Hamlet gets taken hostage whilst Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are left on the ship that's bound for England. Now, they did have a letter with them that said that Hamlet should be executed. But we know, because Hamlet tells Horatio in Act 5, that Hamlet found this letter, realised that he was being taken to England to be executed, and therefore he changes the letter. And he gives Rosencrantz and Guildenstern a new letter that they don't know about, which says that whoever arrives in England carrying this letter should be executed. So we know, as the audience, that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are heading for England, holding a letter that means that they're going to be killed. Hence the title of the play by Tom Stoppard, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are Dead. We, as the audience, have prior knowledge that they are heading towards their death. For all we know, at the end of the play, when Hamlet's already died, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern may still be on the ship, headed to England. They might be on the road to London. They might be the last ones in the play Hamlet who actually die. But of course, the interesting thing is that Hamlet isn't bothered at all by this. He doesn't think that they're old friends who've come to help him out. No, when he's explaining to Horatio that he changes the letters, knowing full well that it means their death, he says to Horatio, "They are not near my conscience," quote unquote. Hamlet really doesn't care about Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, who are just two happy chaps trying to help out, who end up in a desperate situation which costs them their lives. So that's just a brief discussion of some of the characters in Hamlet. Of course, you can do exactly the same thing for Gertrude or Polonius or Horatio, because they've all got their own story arc within the play, their own tragedies, their own backstories. There's even an argument for telling the story of Hamlet from the ghost's point of view. You know, another night on the battlements, no sign of Hamlet, that kind of thing. Well, that's all for this episode. If you liked it, if it helped, if it worked for you, don't forget to like and subscribe. And we'll see you next time on the Shakespeare podcast.